Okay, so due to lots of abnormalities in my schedule and in what's going on in my life, and unfortunate family emergencies, I don't really think I'm going to have a normal video for a while on here. So instead, I recorded an interesting little audiobook for Anglican Renaissance Library that I'll put on here and on there. A little disclaimer is that obviously not all of the views referenced in this sermon, called the Columbian Sermon, are my views anymore. Some of them are outdated. He uses a lot of outdated language. But I thought it was an interesting view into the historical position of American Episcopalians from the 19th century on how we relate to Roman Catholicism, how America, in their view, is its own Protestant nation, and how that these 19th century Episcopalians viewed American Episcopalianism, which he refers to repeatedly throughout this sermon as American Catholicism, as opposed to Roman Catholicism. In the same way, maybe today, an Anglo-Catholic might call themselves an English Catholic. He deploys the term American Catholic, which I find very interesting, and it might have to appropriate for myself someday. But yeah, it's definitely polemical. There's definitely some anti-Roman Catholic rhetoric in the sermon. But to be honest, that's just how religious disputes work, right? If you disagree with somebody, you disagree with them, and people didn't hold back as much back in the day as they do now. So, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with everything that the bishop who wrote the sermon says, but I think it's interesting and worth listening to. I hope you enjoy. America, the Study of Nations, Her Religious Destiny, the Columbian Sermon, delivered in St. Paul's Cathedral, Buffalo, New York, before the Layman's Missionary League of the Diocese of Western New York, by William Stevens Perry, Bishop of Iowa and historiographer of the American Church. And the Lord said unto Abram, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou now art, northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Genesis 8:14 and 15. Wondering, longing, questioning glances had for centuries been turned by the peoples of the Old World towards the illimitable western seas. What lay beyond the vast expanse of waters, all unseen, unknown to European eyes? Sailors, directing their course towards the sun setting, had returned from the sea of darkness, baffled, terrified. Geographers had pored doubtingly over Strabo's foreshadowing of the existence of inhabited lands far to the west of the Pillars of Hercules. Scholars had dreamed that here, amidst the glories of the western horizon, lay the fabled Atlantis, the vanished island, swallowed by the sea of which Plato wrote. Mapmakers had studded their charts with fabulous countries and phantom isles. The returned voyager grew garrulous in his recitals of adventure, now among the abodes of demons, and now with the wandering San Brendan's Isle, or in the Antilia, the ocean site of the seven cities and seas founded by the Spanish prelates who sought in the west a refuge from the conquering Moors. Merchants questioned with each other if beyond the fogs, the calms, the storms, the unknown terrors of the western waters, there might not lie the shortest path to Cathay, Cipango, and the land of the Ind, of which Marco Polo had brought back golden tales. The soldier, impatient for other worlds to conquer, longed to prove his mettle in these phantom lands, where were localized the myths and legends of classic fable, with their gorgons and chimeras dire. The priest, mindful of the great high priest, of his calling, was fired with enthusiasm to bear the standard of the cross westward to unknown lands and other continents, and to break the bread of life among tribes and peoples who had never heard of Christ and his salvation. All men everywhere were impatiently looking and longing for the revelation of the unknown wonders and glories at the West. There had long been, even from classic times, a finger pointing to this undiscovered country. In somewhat vague but lofty verse, Seneca, in the chorus of his Medea, a work made memorable by its philosophic author's ethical genius and his tragic end, had placed on record what Lord Bacon well styled a prophecy of the discovery of America in these well-known lines. There shall come a time in later ages when ocean shall relax his chains and a vast continent appear, and a pilot shall find new worlds, and Thule shall be no more earth's bounds. The minds of all men were thus alive to the possibilities of Western discovery. Influences infinite in extent and beneficence seemed awaiting the magical word which should remove all barriers and reveal the surpassing splendors and the marvels beyond belief with which imagination had invested the unknown Occident. As the centuries passed, hope deepened into certainty. Speculation gave place to conviction, and the mind of man began to grasp the truth, now soon to be assured that the desire, the expectation, the longing of all peoples to the then-known world was not an illusion. The sea of darkness was stripped of its terrors. Streakings of light began to illumine the gloom that had rested on the western horizon. Already Vikings, seeking new homes, had dared to sail westward on the vast expanse of waters and had returned unharmed. In the 10th century of our Christian era, Greenland had been colonized by the hardy and adventuresome Norsemen. In the year of our Lord 1000, Leif Erikson, and a little later, Thorfinn Karlsefni, had explored Vinland, with its wild grapes reaching down into the very sea, and its dense forests of oak and pine along the shore. Several seasons were passed on the North Atlantic coast, temporary homes were reared, and many a child besides Snorri, from whom Scandinavian ecclesiastics, students, statesmen, artists, and magistrates trace their descent with pride today, was born, possibly, on the shores of Massachusetts Bay, certainly between Point Judith and Cape Breton. Prince Madoc, if we may believe the bardic songs of Wales, led to the far distant west numbers of his countrymen, traces of whose coming to this then unknown world are found in still existing legends, hard to be disproved. The classic apothegm that there were many heroes before Agamemnon may be changed to read that there were many pre-Columbian discoverers of America, and of these unremembered and unchronicled explorers, it may be truly said that they at least saw the North American continent which the eyes of Columbus never looked upon. Humboldt was not willing to deny the early and repeated visits of the Basques to the North Atlantic fishing grounds, and Harissa claims that the Basques and Northmen frequented the American shores as early as the 7th century. The Basques, the Normans, the Welsh, the Irish, and the Scandinavians, not to speak of the Asiatics, have each claimed a share in the gift of a new world to the old. These daring explorers and adventurers were led westward by the love of excitement, were seeking new homes, were striving to open new avenues for traffic, were fleeing from ills and dangers existing in their old world abodes. Among so many seekers, is it possible that none should have found the object of their quest? In the year 1491, before the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta sailed from the port of Palos, the English had begun to send out expeditions from Bristol to discover the islands of the Seven Cities. But it was neither Vinland nor San Brendan's Isle. It was not a new world lying concealed in the west that formed the quest of the Genoese adventurer sailing from Palos in 1492. In the words of Professor John Fiske, Columbus never professed to have discovered America. He died in the belief that what he had done was to reach the eastern shores of Asia by a shorter route than the Portuguese. Cathay with its spice and gold, Cipango with its gems and balms, the Orient and the land of Ind, were what Columbus sought, and what he professed with many a solemn asseveration to God to have found. He was never undeceived in his belief that Cuba was the Asiatic main. He lived and died unaware of the discovery of a new world. Wonderful was the enthusiasm when the dreaded and forbidding Sea of Darkness was found to be, not as Columbus supposed, a nearer approach to the Orient, but the highway to an unknown hemisphere. The providence of God had ordered the change of the course of the tiny ships bearing Columbus and his followers when the continent of North America was well nigh reached, a day or two further on his westerly way, says Humboldt, and the Gulf Stream would insensibly have borne the little fleet up the Atlantic coast of the future United States, so that the banner of Castile might have been planted at Carolina. It was reserved for John Cabot, sailing under the patronage of King Henry VII of England in the ship Matthew of Bristol, to discover, on St. John Baptist's Day, 1497, the continent of North America, which Columbus never saw and on which his feet never trod. In the councils of the Almighty, it had been determined that on this continent first seen by English eyes, and first taken possession of, despite the papal bulls of demarcation and exclusion giving the Western world to Spain to hold as a fief of Rome, by an English discoverer, for England's crown and England's church, there should be the scene of the struggle for the mastery between the two civilizations, the two types of Catholicity, the two ideas of liberty, the two notions of nation-making, the two conceptions of law, the two opposed and contending races and peoples, Latin as pitted against Anglo-Saxon, and the rival faiths, Roman Catholicism as opposed to Anglican, or the corrupt, imperfect Christianity of the Middle and Dark Ages, as contrasted with the primitive Catholicity seen in the Church's first years, and shown today in the return to the teachings and practice of the primitive Apostolic Catholic Church of Christ. Here on the American continent was to be the Battle of Armageddon. Here the evil influences, the shameful excesses, the unholy motives, the base and brutal passions engendered by the alliance of a corrupt Christianity with the traditions of a dead Roman imperialism, each and all never more baleful, or more potent, than when a Rodrigo Borgia, himself an incarnation of selfishness, sensuality, and sin, filled, as Alexander VI, the papal chair, and claimed to be the vicar of Christ, were to meet in conflict on American soil with a true Catholicity, a primitive purity, an apostolic Christianity, and to join issue in a struggle the end of which is yet to be. It is a remarkable fact that the discovery of the North American continent, which Columbus failed to accomplish, was made by Cabot in practical defiance of the wish and will of Pope Alexander VI, whose bulls of demarcation and exclusion, issued in 1493, made the Western world a papal donative to Spain to possess in subjection to the Church of Rome. The planting of the cross on the territory now possessed by the United States by Cabot, commissioned by King Henry VII to do this very act, and the formal occupancy of the American mainland in behalf of the Crown of England by virtue of priority of discovery and actual possession, was not the first protest of England's throne and England's church, the free, the national Church of England, recognized and named in Magna Carta, against the assumptions of the papacy, nor was it the last, for it is due to the following up to Cabot's discovery by English statesmen, sailors, soldiers, churchmen, under the reign of the Tudor Queen Elizabeth, and the insistence on the right of England's people and England's church to possess the northern continent, maintained at the cost of English life and treasure, that we, the people of the United States, owe nothing to Columbus, nothing to Spain, nothing to Rome. The genesis of our nationality, our liberty, both civil and religious, our free institutions, our very Christianity, are all to be traced not to the Franciscan convent of Santa Maria de la Rabida, not to the port of Palos, not to the sighting of San Salvador, not to the Genoese adventurer himself, whose life was stained by impurity, selfishness, rapacity, falsehood, and a fiendish cruelty, but to the English people and to the English Church and Christianity. The republics of Mexico and South America represent and reproduce the influences and results of the Latin civilization, the Spanish institutions, and the Roman Christianity. In the struggle for the acquisition, the possession, and the mastery of the North American continent, dating back to the days of Columbus and the Cabots, and ending not even with the cession of New France to the English at the Peace of Paris in 1762, but still maintained in our successive territorial gains of Florida, of the Louisiana Purchase, in the acquisition of Texas, New Mexico, and California, we, the people of the United States, have emphatically and unmistakably demonstrated our origin and the influences, civil and religious, shaping our history, our progress, and our prospective development, and making us what we are as a people today. Our speech, our laws, our liberty, civil and religious, our free institutions, our civilization, our Christianity, our very forms and features, confirm the statement I have made, that we, the people of the United States, owe nothing to Columbus, nothing to Spain, nothing to Rome. Ours, instead, are the English tongue, the English liberty, the English law, the English institutions, and the English Reformation Catholicity. The Latin peoples and the Church of Rome were granted by divine providence full opportunities for planting colonies in this Western world, and of attempting the conversion of the aborigines of America to Christ. The pages of history will tell the result of these attempts at nation-making, these efforts at bringing the tribes peopling the continent to a knowledge of Christianity. The reader of the pages of Prescott and Arthur Helps will recall the nature of the Spanish colonization by conquest, and Parkman will give the story of the settlement of New France. The Christianizing of the natives by the Spaniards, dating back to the very days of Columbus himself, was the enslavement and extermination of these guileless children of nature, while Parkman tells us that the French Jesuit missionaries left the baptized savage a savage still. The Latin race sought rather to gratify its greed for gold than to colonize commonwealths in the New World. The baptism the representatives of Rome administered was a baptism of blood. The story of the Spanish and French settlements on this continent, in which the Church of Rome has from the first been paramount, is one that can only be read with tears. We blush for the civilization, and the Christianity even, which has thus been exemplified. We have been told by no less an authority than the late Chief Magistrate of the United States, in his proclamation calling for the national observance of the 400th anniversary of the discovery of an insignificant West Indian island, that Columbus stood in his age as the pioneer of progress and enlightenment, and the people were, therefore, desired to give expressions of gratitude to divine providence for the devout faith of the true discoverer. The corresponding secretary of the Catholic Truth Society of America, in a printed lecture, had earlier asserted that this American continent owes its very discovery to the heroic faith of a devoted son of the Catholic Church, whose grand object in undertaking the gigantic and perilous work of discovering a new continent was to win souls to Christ through the spread of the Catholic faith. Nothing could be more uncritical or unhistorical than words such as these, whether they come from the president or lecturer, or are re-echoed, as we shall see, by the Pope himself. We find in the letters and papers of Columbus many rhapsodies about the conversion of the natives of the West Indies, but, as one of the latest and most judicial of his biographers aptly puts it, the very first sight he had of them prompted him to consign them to the slave mart, just as if the first step to Christianize was the step which unmans. The letter of His Holiness Pope Leo XIII, addressed to the archbishops and bishops of Spain, Italy, and the two Americas, is of like tenor. Speaking of the man from Liguria, who first landed under the auspices of God on the transatlantic shores, the Pope asserts, by his work, a new world flashed forth from the unexplored ocean. Thousands upon thousands of mortals were returned to the common society of the human race, led from their barbarous life to peacefulness and civilization, and what is of much more importance, recalled from perdition to eternal life by the bestowal of the gifts which Jesus Christ brought into the world. In the same strain, a recent Roman Catholic essayist proceeds, "The world is therefore indebted to the Christian zeal of a Catholic nation, and its noble queen, and her spiritual adviser, but more than all to the great man and heroic Catholic, Columbus himself, for the accomplishment of this great undertaking, and the opening up to commerce, civilization, and Christianity of the fairest portion of the earth. If the traffic between the simple-hearted children of the Antilles, a trade built up from the first and by Columbus himself, upon wrong, robbery, cruelty, and murder, and the licensed agents of the admiral and the insatiate merchants of Spain, be commerce, if the devastation of this fairest portion of the earth, by the extermination of the guileless natives, following their systematic debasement and enslavement to fiends in human forms, be civilization, if the whole management of ecclesiastical affairs, with its inquisitors, and the establishment of the auto da fe in the portions of the New World under the domination of Spain, save the brief episcopate of Las Casas, be Christianity, we can accept these words of reckless assumption, uttered with the view of establishing through Columbus the late realization of Alexander's bull, and securing for Rome and the papacy the conversion of the people of the United States." Prefacing a recent issue of Cardinal Gibbon's Claims of the Catholic Church and the Making of the Republic, is a map which gives the true significance of our Roman Catholic brethren's interest in the Columbian observance, and their insistence on the claims of the Genoese adventurer to be regarded as the discoverer of America. This cartographic curiosity, with its title, The Original Catholic Settlement of the United States, and its legend, The Sign of Christ's Cross is over it all, and its added motto, A soil fertilized by the blood and sweat of Catholic explorers, founders, and missionaries, gives to the Latin peoples, Spanish, French, and the Irish Catholics, as the founders of Maryland are styled, the credit for the original settlement of 4/5 of the territory of the United States, thus seeking to establish through Columbus and his followers the claim of the Church of Rome to the very soil comprehended in Alexander's bull. This is the view of him who sits in Alexander's seat today. The especial reason for which we believe we should commemorate in a grateful spirit the immortal event of the discovery of America, argues His Holiness Pope Leo XIII, is this: it is that Columbus is one of us. In effect, proceeds the pontiff, Columbus discovered America at about the period when a great tempest was going to unchain itself against the Church. Inasmuch as that it is permitted by the course of events to appreciate the divine providence, it really seems that the man for whom Liguria honors herself was destined by a special plan of God to compensate Catholicism for the injury which it was going to suffer in Europe. Well, is it for us who claim a pure and primitive Catholicity, who recognize our origin, who read aright the lessons of our history, that the issue is thus fairly, fully made? There has been planted in this Western world the American Church, a branch of the Holy Catholic Church of Christ's own founding, and this American Catholic Church is a national, autonomous church, independent of alien potentate or power. Ours is the primitive faith, the apostolical succession through the long line of Catholic bishops in the past, reaching even to the Lord himself, the chief shepherd and bishop of souls. We of the American Church represent the Church of England, the Church of Magna Carta, the Church of Augustine of Canterbury, the Church of Britain, founded, if not by St. Paul in his journeyings to the farthest west, at least by followers and converts of the greatest apostle to the Gentiles. We of the American Church trace our spiritual lineage back to the giving of the Great Commission. Go ye into all the world, preach the gospel, disciple the nations. The American Catholic Church is a national church, and as such is independent of foreign rule. It yields no allegiance to the so-called Vicar of Christ, who sits in a Borgia's seat, and would, were it possible to reverse the results of centuries of struggle for the mastership of this land of ours, make good, as he himself avers, the loss of the Saxon and Scandinavian Christianity to Rome at the Reformation period by reducing the United States to his spiritual rule, making us a mere dependency on the will of one whose temporal power his fellow countrymen, those from amongst whom the popes have been chosen for centuries, those who could but know the papacy best, threw off with singular unanimity, and whose arrogant claims of lording it over God's heritage are, perhaps, less wrecked in Rome than by the ultramontanes of our own land. But the genius of the Republic is opposed to foreign domination. The so-called Holy Roman Church is an exotic here. It makes no claim to independent, autonomous existence. It is here, as the primate of all England has aptly characterized, its state on English soil, the Italian mission. Even with the advent of a papal obligate, it is nothing else. Its prelates are powerless, the creatures of the propaganda and the Pope. Their consecration oath binds them to complete subservience to their Lord the Pope. The papal bull creating the See of Baltimore, then comprehending the whole United States, binds this creation of Pope and propaganda irrevocably to the rule of Rome, to absolute dependency on the Pope. The Roman succession in this land of ours was both intrusive and irregular. The excellent Carroll, the first Roman bishop of Baltimore, was consecrated in variance with the requirements of the ancient canons by a titular bishop of Rome, Dr. Charles Walmsley, a so-called vicar apostolic, but destitute of episcopal jurisdiction. And this consecration was done in a Romish gentleman's private chapel by this single bishop, assisted not by two other bishops, but by two priests. and this irregularity was expressly authorized by the papal bull providing for this function and given over the fisherman's seal. And this intrusive, irregular act was done in an English see, duly and canonically filled by a Catholic bishop, having both mission and jurisdiction as a member of the episcopate of a national church, founded in apostolic days. And all the while, there were in the United States not only a duly constituted and autonomous branch of the Catholic Church, but also a college of apostolic bishops. Seabury of Connecticut, White of Pennsylvania, Provoost of New York, consecrated agreeably to the ancient canons and universal usage, each by 3 or more bishops occupying sees, and in the line of succession from the apostles and the Lord of the apostles himself. The church thus constituted and thus officered was the historic church of the country, as well as the church of its English-speaking people. It had come to this continent with its first discoverer, John Cabot, and it had come in spite of Pope Alexander's bull. It had accompanied Frobisher in his search for the Northwest Passage, and the services and sacraments of its faithful priest, Maester Walfall, on the shores of Hudson's Bay in 1578, were the first religious solemnities of the Church of Christ in the ice fields of the far north. It had been with Drake when this daring and relentless foe of Spain in Rome discovered the northern California and Oregon coasts, penetrating far to the northward, and for 6 weeks from the eve of Feast of St. John the Baptist, A.D. 1579, while the Golden Hind was refitting at Drake's Bay, it was the Church of England's services and sacraments that Francis Fletcher, priest and preacher of Drake's motley crew, celebrated in sight of sailors and savagers alike. It was with Raleigh's colonies in Roanoke, where, in the ill-fated city of Raleigh, the church's matins and evensong marked each day's beginning and close, and where in this first attempt of the English people at colonization within the territory of the United States, the Indian chieftain Monteo was baptized with the forms of the Book of Common Prayer on the 9th Sunday after Trinity, August 13th, 1587, and a week later, Virginia Dare, the first Christian born in Virginia, was admitted to holy baptism by the unnamed priest of the settlement. This church was with the settlers of Jamestown, Virginia, where the saintly Robert Hunt ministered in the rude, temporary church building till his death, and this Catholic church was at Fort St. George on the coast of Maine in 1607, where Richard Seymour officiated in the first church built by English hands on the chill New England shores. It was present, this church of Magna Carta, with its benedictory services, and its priest, at the inauguration of representative government on this continent, when the Virginia burgesses, elected by the popular vote, met in the choir of the little church at Jamestown, and legislated for Commonwealth and Church, after prayers by Parson Buck. It has been this liberty-loving Church of Magna Carta with us throughout our country's past, and when we study its history we cease to wonder at its presence and its prayers in connection with each step in our country's development. The very planting of this country is found to be an act of faith. The struggle for the supremacy in this Western world of the English people and England's Holy Church as opposed to the Latin peoples and the faith of Rome. The very idea of liberty, as we understand it today, is the gift of the Church of England to the English-speaking peoples. It was under the lead of Stephen Langton, Archbishop of Canterbury, that the English barons wrung, despite the power of Rome, Magna Carta from a perfidious king, and Magna Carta, be it remembered, was anathematized by the Roman pontiff for its provisions calling for the maintenance, unimpaired, of the liberties of Holy Church, the Church of England, the Church of the English-speaking peoples we represent today. The close connection of the Church with the development of our liberty, civil and religious, our laws, our institutions, our very civilization, is a matter of history. Free elective government dates its origins to Virginia, and to the meeting of the House of Burgesses in the church at Jamestown in 1619, rather than to the social compact framed a year or more later in the cabin of the Mayflower, or to the Puritan theocracy of Massachusetts, where the union and identity of church and state were maintained with tyrannous force. In the Church of England, colony of Virginia, the people were the source of power. They chose their representatives, who legislated for the common weal. In Massachusetts, the magistrates and ministers were autocratic. To be a freeman, to exercise the franchise, to claim the protection of the authorities, one must be a member of the Puritan Church. Quakers, Baptists, churchmen were outside of the pale of the law. They were taxed for the maintenance of a magistracy, in the choice of which they had no voice, and for the support of a ministry which accorded to them no spiritual services or kindly oversight in return. It was only in sullen obedience to the king's missive, and on the abrogation of a charter gained and kept by fraud, that the grim Puritans of Massachusetts relaxed their bitter persecution, even unto death, of the fanatical Quakers, and suffered to the surpliced priest of the Church of England to minister in accordance with the forms of the common prayer in the Boston town house. The preliminary struggles for independence were fought quite as much in the vestries of Virginia and the colonies to the southward, combating the exercise in America of a foreign rule, as in the New England town meetings. It was but natural that when the strife for freedom came, churchmen should be leaders from the start. Of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, 2/3 were, by baptism, by office-bearing, by attendance on her services and sacraments, members of the American Colonial Church. The first prayer in the Continental Congress was offered by a patriotic priest of Philadelphia. The first chaplain of Congress was the saintly William White, afterwards the first bishop of Pennsylvania. The first president of Congress was a churchman. It was the casting vote of a churchman that decided the attitude of Pennsylvania towards the Declaration. It was the casting vote of another churchman that carried Delaware for freedom at this critical juncture. Of several of the 13 colonies, all the signers were churchmen. Of even a larger number, it is the fact that all were churchmen but one. It is the testimony of the elder Adams that but for 3 men the country's independence would never have been assured. These 3 men were churchmen. The blood of patriot churchmen moistened every battlefield from Bunker Hill to Yorktown. A churchman's hand swung out from the old Christ Church belfry in Boston, the signal lanterns that guided the ride of Paul Revere. The hands of churchmen were busy in the destruction of tea in Boston Harbor, in the pulling down of the statue of George III on the Bowling Green, New York, and in the burning of the Royal Arms in Philadelphia. When independence had been declared, a churchman first read in public, in the State House Square of Philadelphia, the Declaration of Independence, written by a Virginia vestryman, its adoption moved by another churchman, reported by a churchman as chairman of the committee to which the draft was referred, adopted through churchmen's votes, and signed by 35 churchmen's hands, while, of other faiths, there were but 12 Congregationalists, 4 Presbyterians, 3 Quakers, and later, in August, 1 Romanist, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, who was for the greater part of his life a pew-holder at St. Anne's, Annapolis, one of the historic parishes of the American Church. Although a number of the clergy, notably those of foreign birth, were faithful to their vows of allegiance to the motherland, still the major part of the whole body was in sympathy with the patriotic cause, and fully 20 took a personal part in the measure of the patriots, either as members and chairmen of the committees of safety, and correspondents as chaplains, or as actual combatants. It was John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg, a Virginia priest of the church, who threw off his ministerial garb to lead his people to the field of battle. It was Charles Min Thruston, another Virginia priest, who took to the field and became known in the Revolutionary annals as the fighting parson of the Shenandoah. Provoost of New York, Crowes of New Jersey, and Robert Smith of South Carolina, afterwards the first bishops of their respective states, bore arms in the strife. 6 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were sons or grandsons of priests of the Church. No religious body in the land can represent so full, so complete, so notable a record of patriotism in the struggle which won for us our civil and religious liberties as the Church we represent today. The charge of Toryism, grounded on the fact that a portion of the clergy and certain of the laity clung to the royal cause, is offset by the facts to which we have alluded. With far greater truth could this charge be urged against the Congregationalists, of whom scores, hundreds, even thousands among them, ministers, magistrates, lawyers, and the leading men socially, politically, financially, of the New England provinces, adhered to the crown. Puritan Harvard furnished 70 names from its list of graduates to a single bill of attainder. The Presbyterians of the Middle and Southern states were largely Royalists, contributing officers, chaplains, and soldiers to the Tory regiments of the Carolinas, and at the close of the strife emigrating to the provinces by thousands. The numerical supremacy of the Presbyterians in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick today is due to the preponderance of Presbyterian refugees fleeing from the independent states when the war was over. The Quakers were, with a few noteworthy exceptions on the British side. The Methodists, following the behests of John Wesley, whose Taxation No Tyranny won for him the thanks and pay of the British ministry, were noticeably in sympathy with the motherland. Francis Asbury and Captain Thomas Webb, their acknowledged leaders, were confined during much of the war as Tory suspects in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The Romanists were, almost to a man, Tories, and the patriotism of the Carrolls and a few others like-minded, worthy as it is of record and remembrance, cannot condone the enlistment and service of a professedly Irish Roman Catholic regiment in Philadelphia during the British occupation of that city, and the absolute refusal of the French Romanists of Canada, bishop, priests, and people, to make common cause with the Americans in throwing off the British yoke. With these facts patent to every student of American history, it is whimsical to note the passive acquiescence of churchmen in the arrogant and unhistorical assumptions of the popular histories of an uncritical period, which ascribe to the Puritans a tolerance and a love of liberty they never displayed, and in their laudations of New England as the source of our freedom have overlooked the greater claims of Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York, which writers of our own day are just bringing to light. The connection of the Church of England with our discovery, our colonization, our development, our independence, supplies the key to our history as a people. It reveals to us the struggle for the settlement, the mastership, the acquisition of the continent of North America, extending through the 4 centuries, dating from Columbus and Cabot, between the Latin peoples and the Roman faith and the English nation and church. Read in this light, and with the study of documents found in the State Paper Office of London, and among the royal archives of Simancas in Spain, the modern student of our history, under the capable guidance of such investigators as Professor Alexander Brown in his recent Genesis of the United States, and like philosophic treatises, accompanied by documentary evidence not to be gainsaid, our history is being reconstructed, and the Church's share in it all confessed. In view of this contention of rival races and opposing faiths for the possession, for the supremacy, for the very territory of the North American continent, the story of each little colony on the Atlantic coast, dating back to the last years of the 16th century and the very beginning of the 17th, all antedating the landing of the Pilgrims on Plymouth Rock, becomes invested with an interest and an importance difficult to exaggerate. The conflicts with the Indians and their French and Spanish allies at the south, along the Alleghenies, and on the northern frontiers of New York and New England, are each and all events in a holy war, and the issue of this long-continued strife, as spread upon the page of history, and in fact as patent to every observing eye, prefigures our final destiny, and presages the conquering and to conquer of the American Catholic Church in the days to come. The results of this struggle of the centuries for the possession and supremacy of the North American continent between the Latin peoples and the Roman faith, and the English race and the Church, are evident to all men. In spite of Alexander's bulls, Spain cannot claim today a foot of the North American continent. Even the land fall of Columbus, the San Salvador, which he first discovered and where he raised the standard of Castile and Leon, has passed into English hands. From our most eastern point to the southern extremity of Florida, from the Gulf of Mexico at the south to the inland seas of our northern border, all along the Pacific coast, wherever in fact the stars and stripes of the flag of the great republic floats over the territory which is ours by conquest, by purchase, or by possession, we are not Spanish, not French, not Latin, but instead we are an English-speaking people, and our institutions, our civil and religious freedom, our ideas of liberty and law, are those of English ancestry, and not those of the Latin race. Even those portions of our land where, in other days, the Spanish or the French monarchs held sway, have, in their absorption in our common nationality, become like the rest of our country, imbued with the English civilization, the English ideas of liberty and the law, the English faith. Spain and France have contributed practically nothing to our civilization, nothing to the making of the Republic. The claims of the Church of Rome to a share in the molding of the nation and the fashioning of our free institutions rest on no historical foundation whatever. Whatever the Latin peoples or the Church of Rome may have accomplished in the past of our country's history have long since faded out of sight in the overmastering power and the abiding presence in this land of the English settler, soldier, statesman, and churchman. Again do I assert, and the verdict of history will bear out the assertion, that we, the people of the United States, owe nothing of our present greatness and glory to Columbus, nothing to Spain, nothing to Rome. Our fathers and their fathers before them recognized the fact that this land of ours was to be redeemed by blood, by infinite pains, by the lavish expenditure of treasures from the machinations of the French Jesuits of New France, whose absolution of their Indian converts, Parkman tells us, was conditioned on the savages' professions of hatred of the English heretics and colonists, and from the Spanish fanatics and inquisitors of the West and South, who allowed no religious liberties whatever. If the claims of the Romanists to the making and shaping of the Republic are historically true, why is it not the Inquisition still maintained, as it was set up a century and a half ago in the Spanish territory, west of the Mississippi, now a part of the state of Iowa? And why were ministrations of any others than priests of the Roman obedience forbidden in Florida, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Louisiana, until, in the overthrow of the supremacy of the Latin race, when the South and the Southwest were acquired by cession and purchase, religious liberty unknown before was gained? The Church of a people speaking the English language and built up by Englishmen on the race ideas of liberty, progress, right and law, found in the English Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, the English Constitution, the English Common Law, the English Bible, the English Book of Common Prayer, must be like the Mother Church of England, as independent, a national, an American Catholic Church. Offspring of the National Church of England, she is no mission, dependent on the propaganda or pope, but is herself national, independent, owning no supreme head but Christ, possessing in her completeness and continuity the historic episcopate, the apostolate, instituted by the Lord Jesus Christ himself. It is the free church in the free state, the ideal of the great Italian statesman Cavour, that we American Catholics possess. For the men who framed the federal Constitution and organized and set on foot the machinery of our republican form of government, as well as those who declared our civil freedom and won on the field of battle our independence, were largely the men who organized in close accordance with the principles of our civil system this independent American Church. Our autonomy was gained in the birth throes of the nation. In the preface to our Book of Common Prayer, we emphasize the fact, true of no other religious body in the land, that in the winning of our national independence, our ecclesiastical freedom was assured. The American Catholic Church, historically the church of the country from the date of Cabot's practical protest against the bull of Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, in 1497, became the church of the nation as it made its structural organization conformable in the minutest particulars to the form of government adopted by the people, and made itself, like the state, free from allegiance to foreign potentate or power. We cannot reverse the decisions of the centuries. We cannot put aside or ignore the teachings of our country's past history. If we listen to the assumptions of a false Catholicism, we do despite to our fathers, who gave us constitutional liberty and religious freedom. We owe neither of these inestimable privileges to the Latin race or the Church of Rome. They are our priceless heritage from our English sires and from England's Church. We may not wisely sell our birthright for a mess of pottage. The visitor at Chicago's Columbian Exposition may see, if he will, the bulls of demarcation and exclusion which profess to give the New World to Spain to hold as an appanage of Rome. Let the sight of these parchments, signed by the sin-stained hand of a Rodrigo Borgia, a selfish sensualist, who claimed to sit in St. Peter's seat and be the vicar of the sinless Christ, and sealed with a fisherman's ring, worn so unworthily by one who had practically bought the popedom, excite every American's heart to grateful praise to the Church's head, the Son of God, that we, free men in Christ, free men whom the truth makes free, members of the American Catholic Church, independent of alien potentate or power, knowing no king but Jesus, owning no allegiance save to him who is God over all, blessed forever, owe neither our ecclesiastical or our civil freedom, our institutions, our liberty, our laws, our civilization, our discovery, our founding, our history, or anything of moment that we have or that gives us standing among the peoples of the earth. To Columbus, nothing to Spain, nothing to Rome. We have, as a nation, and we offer to the world, the highest type, the fullest realization of our freedom, a constitutional liberty protected by law. We have, and we offer to the nation and the world, the truest religious liberty, the highest, the free, the independent church, and the free and independent state, the American branch of the Catholic Church of our Lord Jesus Christ. The promise is, for all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. That promise of old, given to the Father of the faithful, is renewed to us and to our children. Let us arise, and in the name of God possess this beautiful land.